Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the ScruffyMovies podcast. I'm Zach Wallace.
And I'm John Crocker.
And today our topic is something a little fun. We actually just saw Venom, and so we decided to do a Spider-Man podcast.
All about Spider-Man. There has been a surprisingly large amount of movies made of Spider-Man over the past couple of decades, I guess it is now.
Yeah, well, I think the first Spider-Man 1 came out in like 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. I actually recently went back and watched Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire, and I think it was like 2007, and it blew my mind how old that was. Mm-hmm. And then looking back at Episode 1, Episode 2, Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, I know I default to Star Wars talk references anytime I can. Blew my mind that I was 12 years old when Spider-Man 1 came out. That I would have never guessed that in a million years. If you put $1,000 on the line and said name the year, I probably couldn't have got you within 5 years.
Yeah, that movie was like formative for me because I love superhero movies and stuff, and that movie was the one that like really captured me. Was really like wrapped me up in it. I was like the perfect age to be like, oh, Spider-Man. I even remember going back and being like, I wonder what people said about that movie. And it got like, it got good reviews, but it got like some bad reviews. People were like, this is dumb. And I was like, I loved that part when I was a kid.
Well, that was before superheroes were really brought as much into the limelight as they are now.
Yeah, we had X-Men, Blade, and Spider-Man.
Yeah, and Blade, right. And Blade was the most profitable franchise of superhero movies until Spider-Man came out?
For Marvel, yes. X-Men probably did better than Blade, but Blade was like before X-Men. Right. So, I mean, the fact could be argued that without Blade, we wouldn't be talking about how excited we are for Avengers 4 next year.
Now, I know we're totally derailing off of Spider-Man within the first few moments here.
Mostly about Spider-Man.
How many Blade movies are there total?
3 and a TV series.
Okay, so I have seen 1 and 2. Or maybe 1 and 3.
Have you seen the one with Ryan Reynolds?
No.
That's the third one, so you haven't seen that one then.
Awesome. So, Spider-Man. I'll start this off, as I usually do, with a question for you, sir.
Kick it.
Who is your favorite Aunt May?
What? Aunt May? Oh, I wasn't even expecting that question. I heard you say, who is your favorite? And I was like, Spider-Man. Easy. Aunt May threw me for a loop.
Yeah. Because we have 3 now. We have the Tobey Maguire trilogy.
Rosemary Harris, I believe is her name.
In those. Yeah. Sally Field was in the Amazing Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And then
Marissa Tomei
was in Homecoming.
It's funny because, and I'm sure we'll get to this a little later, the current MCU Spider-Man is my favorite Spider-Man. My favorite like Spider-Man stories have come from there and everything. But probably the original Aunt May with Tobey Maguire is probably my favorite Aunt May, just because she gives like that motherly tone that none of the rest of them give. Sally Field did all right. But, I mean, she wasn't in the best movies. That's not her fault. But she did what she could.
Yeah. To me, it's weird because...
Are you being tempted by Smokey and the Bandit to say Sally Field?
Totally. Of course. Everything Smokey and the Bandit just taints my view of the world. I would say that in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, that Aunt May probably had the most screen time, and she was probably the most developed character. Mm-hmm. And yes, definitely the most motherly. Sally Field may be my favorite just because I thought she did excellent at that role.
I think you're just seeing through Smokey and the Bandit tinted glasses.
But she definitely had more of an emotional commitment from me in that movie than in the originals with Tobey Maguire, though. And then the new one, the new Aunt May, I really liked her too. I feel like they may not have used her as much as they did in the past, and that was probably on purpose because they wanted to tell more of a Spider-Man story than a story of Spider-Man story, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I'm very excited about her. I think that she did a great job, and I'm looking forward to what she can do in the future. I kind of want to say Sally Field.
I knew you as soon as you asked that question, and I was like saying it, and I was thinking in my head as I was speaking. I was like, Crocker's definitely gonna say Sally Field.
Yeah.
You like Smokey and the Bandit too much to not say that.
You're right. I will give you that point.
Yeah, I think that they haven't used Marissa Tomei as much, but I agree with you. I think that they are focusing more on Spider-Man right now, especially because they're trying to set up their iteration of Spider-Man that we haven't seen yet. So I think that they're more focusing on him. I think probably she's going to end up playing a bigger role as we get deeper into the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, and I really liked the new Spider-Man Homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of my favorites for sure. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite Spider-Man right now. I think so. Now, after we get maybe another movie or two with the new Spider-Man, he could very well be the front runner. I think at the moment, my favorite Spider-Man is probably the Tobey Maguire series, just because I really loved those, especially the first two. But I am excited to see where they're going with new Spider-Man, and it's more of like a relatable sort of coming of age story. It's they spend a lot more time in a classroom setting, surrounded by other students, going to the what was it, the you don't call it a smartathon. What do you
like a academic decathlon?
Yeah, an academic decathlon. Like
I know that because of Mean Girls.
There you go. They spend a lot more time sort of in that zone, whereas in the other movies, they had the high school scenes where the girl trips and falls and he catches her, and that's sort of in all the movies, and it's obligatory when you're doing a Spider-Man movie. But in the originals, it's almost like you don't even really remember those parts.
It's glossed over.
It's glossed over, whereas the new Spider-Man is much more of a smaller feeling story, which I think they did on purpose because you have the rest of the MCU happening around you, and they sort of have to bring the focus down to that, I don't want to say childlike level, but more of a youthful feel to it. Whereas when the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans came out, they were the blockbuster superhero series. They were as big as it got. So
that was it. It was Spider-Man.
Yeah, they had to be a little bit more larger than life in that series, I would say.
Yeah, I'm a huge sucker for like a good coming of age story and stuff. I'm a gigantic sucker for it. So the high school parts of a lot of stuff is like always my favorite. Like my favorite TV show of all time, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I love seasons 1 through 3, because they're in high school, and it's like them traversing through high school, but then also having to do these incredible things. So the fact that it's glossed over kind of in the first Spider-Man movie is, and I went back and watched it recently, and I even like had forgotten how quick they gloss over it. It's like 30 minutes, and he's out of high school. He's graduated.
Yeah, graduated.
He's like doing his thing in the real world.
In college, has his own apartment. Yeah.
And they glossed over that fact so quickly for me that I loved actually being able to like slow it down and take it to Peter Parker's level in high school. And I believe I saw, I think it was the director of Spider-Man Homecoming, John Watts. Somebody was like, can you describe the tone that you were going for in Homecoming without giving any spoilers or anything like that? And he said, I want my movie to feel like The Breakfast Club, except that one of them's a superhero. And watching it, I was like, yes.
Totally.
This is it. I was like, he's done it.
Well, they develop more characters, right? Like, my favorite, I can't remember her name, but the girl with all the smart-ass remarks.
Yeah, that's MJ.
Oh, that's MJ?
Yeah, that's the new MJ. Her name is Michelle, but then at the end of the movie, they're like, why don't you use your old nickname like you always did, MJ? And she's like, maybe, or whatever
so
she
it's
says.
Not Mary Jane anymore?
No, it's her. She's the new MJ.
That's pretty sweet. Well, because he did have the love interest, who was the other girl, who wasn't MJ.
Yeah, Liz.
I thought she did a pretty good job.
I thought she did too. And man, when in the theater, whenever Michael Keaton opens the door to her house when Peter's over there to like pick her up for the prom, in the theater, everyone in there went, like it was the biggest twist anyone could have seen coming.
But we've seen that with like every other Spider-Man too, I feel like.
Yeah, because Harry, in the first Spider-Man, Harry's dad was the Green Goblin.
Right.
And turned on Spider-Man. Then it was his professor, Doc Ock, in Spider-Man 2, turned on Spider-Man.
Yeah, but even in Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire, like that's when you actually see Gwen, right?
Yeah.
Which is from the other series, and her dad is still the cop. The chief,
yeah,
so it's like
does not play a big of role in the original series as it does in the sequel series.
Definitely not. But you get a lot of those weird shared characters and shared roles. Like you mentioned Harry, who in The Amazing Spider-Man was your main Green Goblin.
Yeah.
But in Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, which I'm just going to refer to those as Tobey Maguire Spider-Man because there's no better way to do that.
Yeah, there's not really when we're talking about all of them.
The father is the Green Goblin, but then Harry eventually becomes the Green Goblin.
The Hobgoblin.
The Hobgoblin, when he's got a new hoverboard. It's an actual hoverboard instead of like a glider.
He looks like a snowboarder.
Yeah, totally. But you see a lot of crossovers because Gwen, like I mentioned, and Brock are in that movie. Gwen is also is the main love interest in the Amazing Spider-Man. We'll eventually get to Venom, where we actually see Brock
again
played out. There's a lot of these people. Flash Thompson, I think is his last name, is in every Spider-Man movie as the major bully.
Yeah.
They definitely weakened him up a little bit to put him on the level in Homecoming as sort of a more youthful person. Now, he's not like a big built jock quite as much.
And see, I don't mind that really, because in Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man, Peter's at public school. So the fact that he would have to interact with these huge like jock dudes, like I understand.
Yeah.
But then in the new Spider-Man movies, they put him in like a science academy. So Flash would have to be smart at some level to get in there.
Right.
So I like that it's almost more of like a verbal thing with Peter, where he's just like verbally degrading him instead of physically.
Right. It's more of a battle of wits instead of a battle of muscle.
Right.
There's even the thing where when Peter disappears, Flash takes his spot at the
academic decathlon.
Correct. Whereas
for everyone out there who couldn't see, Crocker just pointed at me and was like, "You know what it is. Just say it for me.
Say that word." So it was more of a battle of wits than a battle of brawn, and I thought that was a really unique take and something really cool. But it's nifty to see that they have maintained a lot of these characters because I just mentioned I went back and rewatched Spider-Man 3. And when they mentioned Gwen's name and Brock's name, it was the first time it dawned on me that is supposed to be the same girl that was in The Amazing Spider-Man as the major love interest. We just got done watching Venom, so I was familiar with Brock's name at that point. Her dad is the cop, her dad is the cop. Like, all these things interplay with one another in a really, really cool way that actually might be more seamless in the Spider-Man franchise than a lot of other franchises out there, where they might take more creative control and sort of restructure the characters. And if you're really going to change up their role, you'll change their name too, and that type
like
of
Michelle
stuff.
Is the new MJ.
Yes, exactly. There might be some societal norm issues with Mary Jane being so popular. That could very well have something to do with it. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think that has anything to do with it.
You don't think so?
No, I think they were just trying to do like a twist.
They don't want to market Mary Jane to a bunch of middle schoolers.
I don't know if that's what they were even had that in their minds at all.
Yeah,
I think really they were just going for like on a lesser scale than what Iron Man 3 did with the Mandarin twist, but something where it's like you see somebody the entire movie and then at the end they're revealed to be something else.
Yeah.
Except in this one it was much more successful.
Totally.
Than Iron Man 3.
Yeah, there's just a lot of really cool stuff that if you go back and you rewatch them, you can start to pick up on things that would have just, and did at the time, totally went over my head. I mean, when I was 12, 14, watching Gwen for the first time, I had never read the comics. I had no idea that she was the original
like the
love
Gwen
interest.
Stacy,
the Gwen Stacy, and had no idea what role her father would play. And in that movie, they played it down. I mean, she was just the other pretty face that was necessary for Mary Jane in that movie to leave Peter and be jealous. And at that point, I thought it was nothing more than a character for character's sake.
Right. Yeah, and then they brought her back. Emma Stone played her in Amazing Spider-Man, which I feel like they were testing the waters in Amazing Spider-Man. And then Amazing Spider-Man 2, I don't even know if you know all of this, they were like universe building like hell in that movie. The girl who, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember her real name. She plays Jen Erso in Rogue One.
Yeah, totally. Jen, I had in my notes at some point, Jen freaking Erso.
Yeah, she was playing Felicia Hardy in Amazing Spider-Man 2, who is also known as Black Cat, who was set up to get her own movie spinoff after Amazing Spider-Man. Also, in a deleted scene, I believe, you see Norman Osborn's head, which they chopped off, and they were going to make a Sinister Six movie, which is why at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2, Harry's like, yeah, I probably just need like 5 more guys, or whatever he says. They were going to make their own Sinister Six movie. They were going to make a Black Cat movie. They were going to do, I guess Norman Osborn was coming back. They had greenlit Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 that might have been shot back to back. And then Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out and people hated it. And they're like, well, I wonder what we can do. And this is like this is one of my favorite stories to tell. Around the same time, Sony got hacked by, it's never been reported as true, but everybody thinks they were hacked by North Korea. Because at the same time as like all this was going down, the movie The Interview with Seth Rogen was set to come out, which is where Seth Rogen and James Franco, who's also in Spider-Man, go to North Korea to kill Kim Jong-un. So it's never been, I don't think it's ever been reported as like truthful, but Sony was hacked, a bunch of movies were leaked, a bunch of scripts, emails, all kinds of stuff was leaked. So basically an email was leaked saying that like Sony had talks with Kevin Feige of bringing Spider-Man in, but the talks had fallen through. It wasn't going to happen anymore. They were done with it. They were moving on with Amazing Spider-Man. Marvel Studios was moving on with whatever. And but after all this hacking and stuff happened, the woman who was in charge, Amy Pascal, was basically asked politely to step down as CEO of Sony. And her last act as CEO was to sign a deal with Marvel Studios, giving them access to Spider-Man, and she gets executive producer credit for every Spider-Man movie to come out now until eternity.
So that's something that we touched on a little bit, I think, potentially in a previous podcast, and if so, we won't spend much time on it. But this executive producer credit thing, where Stan Lee gets executive producer credit for every Marvel film, and he's has zero say in what gets made, other than he has to basically say he likes it to the public. I had no idea that there were so many people out there getting credits in movies as business ploys and business leverage.
A million of them. She does. I'm assuming she does nothing on those movies. She's probably set up in a beach somewhere, like just checking the reviews for Avengers Infinity War, and she's like, fantastic, another $10 million in my bank account.
Yes.
Or whatever it is. I just love that because we can thank Spider-Man being in the MCU, we can thank Seth Rogen, James Franco, and Kim Jong-un. They're the reasons why Spider-Man is in the Avengers movies now.
That's fantastic. So, The Amazing Spider-Man, because that's what we've been talking about. Personally, and I'll ask you your thoughts as my question to you, but to me, I thought they were great action movies. I had some issues with number 2. I believe there was a car that just like spontaneously bust into flames, and I mean Spider-Man was a little too angsty for my liking.
Yeah.
And there were some things that I didn't like about it. There were also some things that I absolutely loved about those movies. When at the end, spoiler alert, if you didn't know this, when Gwen dies, that hit me in the feels more than anything that has ever happened in a Spider-Man movie ever. Like that is, I'm tearing up thinking about it.
Yeah, that comic storyline is something that storyline of Gwen Stacy dying, like Peter reaches out and snaps her neck on accident, happens in the comics.
Right.
And so I saw Amazing Spider-Man 2 opening weekend with my buddy. And I was like oblivious to the fact. I knew that was a story that happened, but like I didn't know where it happened, how it happened, whatever. When they went into like the clock at the end, and nothing like big had happened, I heard him just go, "Oh no!" And I was like, "What? What's about to happen?" Like he knew before I knew that was going down.
Yeah, I was totally oblivious. I've read many comics, but never in order, never of really even the most popular comics out there. So I had no clue. I was walking into that when the movie was ending, and oh man, when he looks down and he sort of pans away and you see his face and not hers, and he's talking to her like she may have just opened her eyes or something, and then it pans back, but she's bleeding out of her nose instead of opening her eyes. I mean, that was done right. Everything about that scene was just done absolutely right. And it did, in my mind, make up for a lot of the rest of the movie. I wanted to take a shower afterwards because I just felt so bad. But at the same time, I think that it's probably the most underrated Spider-Man franchise or the Spider-Man series of movies,
Mm-hmm.
I think they made a few lazy movie-making mistakes. You know, again, things like cars just blowing up for no good reason. And one thing, I'll tell you what, the biggest problem I had with The Amazing Spider-Man is that he walks into a room full of spiders. One random one bites him. So it's not unique. It's not...
It didn't find him or something.
Didn't find him, and he didn't find it. You have 1,000 other spiders in that room that could have bitten 1,000 other people. And at the time, we didn't know that the father put his DNA in it or whatever. So It feels as if that bite was in no way, shape, or form unique. And then later in the movie, when they're sort of putting the antidote together for the lizard, and they're concocting this thing that says lizard antidote on it, like actually says that, in my mind, I'm going, okay, well, it would be super easy for you guys to take one of the 5,000 spiders you have and make a spider antidote. So in my brain, I'm thinking did not feel like a unique power that found its way to Peter Parker, did not feel like a power that could not be easily undone. And when you go at it like that, it just doesn't have that unique sense about it, which I think is very important when it comes to character building and especially origin stories of any superhero.
That's funny. I've never actually really thought about it like that before. I guess because it was another thing that my mind just kind of glossed over. I was like, yeah, Peter gets bit by a spider, whatever. I've never thought about it like as a unique thing that happens to only him, and then all this stuff. Maybe they heard fan outcry of that. Maybe the fan outcry was greater than what I knew, and so that's why maybe in the second one it was like, oh yeah, his dad did all like the DNA testing and stuff like this.
Yeah, and interjected his own DNA, so only him and his bloodline would be able to be a perfect match, you know. Whereas in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, they're walking through the lab, it's class tour, and I think it might be MJ.
Yeah, he's taking pictures of MJ.
There's one missing. Mm-hmm. And she tells the lab person there's one missing, and she's like, oh, you know, that's a surprise. And then you see it fall down, bite Tobey Maguire, and we're off to the races. Now, something unique is that you do not see new Spider-Man and Spider-Man Home and Marvel's MCU Spider-Man getting bit. That was something that they did not want to even mess with at all. They didn't want to put that in the movie. And I'm okay with that decision. Him just kind of showing up as Spider-Man.
Spider-Man at this point has become the new Batman.
Right.
Of like, I could walk up to a random person on the street and I'm like, how did Batman become Batman? They would go, oh, his parents were shot.
In an alley.
Like, they know.
Right.
And Spider-Man's almost become the new thing now, whereas the same thing as Batman. If I walked up to a random person on the street, just picked him out of random, and I go, how did Spider-Man get his powers? They're like, oh, he got bit by a radioactive spider.
Right.
Like, everyone just knows the story.
And same thing with Uncle Ben. I'm so glad we did not have to watch Uncle Ben die again.
I did see somebody, it was like it was a meme on Facebook, and it was like the quote from SpongeBob. It was like when they make another Spider-Man movie and they show Uncle Ben dying again, and it was like the fish cracking his knuckles, and he's like, how many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Yeah, totally. Because those are emotionally jaunting scenes in both of the previous movies.
And I thought the one of the good things I can say about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and I have so much respect for actors who do this, they don't care if they look pretty or like they look good in the scene. They're just acting the scene. And Andrew Garfield does that at least 2 times that I know of for Uncle Ben and for Gwen Stacy. Whenever I was watching Amazing Spider-Man for the first time, and he's like, no, and just starts like screaming, but it's not like no screaming. He's just like like he can't, like his mind can't process it. I remember being in the theater and being like, whoa.
Yeah,
like that's some real stuff that like would actually happen, and he's making a funny face, so people are like snickering at it, and I'm like, you guys can laugh all you want, but like
I'd be making that face. That's
what would happen.
Yeah, totally. And there are, talking about the new Spider-Man Homecoming, I did hear that the director set out to actually not put the spider bite, not put seeing Uncle Ben die.
Yeah.
Like, he set out to remove those things because, like you said, they're almost common knowledge. You're wasting your time going over ground that's already been gone over. You know, you're reinventing the wheel at that point.
And they kind of mention it a little bit too. Peter's like walking down the street with Ned or something after Ned found out that he's Spider-Man. He's like, so how'd you get these powers? And he's like, I was bit by a spider. It's a long story. And then Ned like almost interrupts him. And he's like, whoa, look at this. And it's just like, doesn't matter. Yeah, we know what we need to know.
They put that in there to appease everyone, you know, and let them know that they're not doing anything super crazy with the story. Yeah. But that it is going in the same direction as all of the others.
Yeah. I also really liked that the relationship with Ned in that movie. I feel like that was something that we kind of got with Harry, of them like being friends, but of course then they have the whole arc that carries through every movie of Harry hating Spider-Man because he thinks Spider-Man killed his father. So that is, I mean, it is in those movies where like Peter has the friend, but it's also kind of not. I like that in these movies he just has like his dude and like friends, they're good, like this dude will help him out. And I love it even when Peter's like puts on his old like homemade suit to go try and take the Falcon down, the Vulture down, and he's like in the computer lab at school typing it up, and he's like, boom, guy in the chair.
Yeah, guy in the chair. I like that.
So excited to help him.
It was a lot more like buddy comedy aspects with all of that than you get in other movies. And I didn't like how Green Goblin, how Harry in episode 3 was just conveniently had amnesia until he needed to not. That was one of my. I have actually a few complaints with the third Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. It was not my favorite out of the 3 by any means. It was my least favorite out of the 3, really. But I didn't like that. There was
a lot of those convenient moments in that movie, like when Captain Stacy's like, oh, we've thought that Flint Marko might have had something to do with Uncle Ben's death for a while, but now he's broken out of prison and he has superpowers that is necessary to fight Spider-Man, so now we'll tell you guys about it.
Yeah.
Same with freaking Harry's butler at the end, where he's like, I cleaned your father's wounds. The wounds came from his own glider. Why couldn't he just tell him that in the first Spider-Man movie?
Exactly. But, you know, I'll say this, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like every Aunt May character, they play as if they know. Like, they're always there to give the proper advice. We sure could use Spider-Man right now. Ooh, wherever he is, we sure are missing him. You know, every Aunt May, all of them, all sort of throw that out, and it's sort of inferred that they know. And you almost I wait in every single movie, every time I watch any of these, I'm just waiting for that scene where Peter leaps out of his window and makes a little too much noise, and Aunt May looks up and smiles because she knows what he's doing. Now, that never comes. That doesn't happen, but you feel as if it should. And then in a lot of the Tobey Maguire ones, you do almost feel like MJ knows who he is, ultimately. But they never come out and say it. And he does spend a lot of time. Tobey Maguire spends a lot of time with his mask off. He really does.
You think so?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, well, that's a whole thing now. I see people like freaking out about it when a new MCU movie comes out. And I remember people specifically picking on the fact that in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Captain America is like this great tactician, fighter. He knows all these like rules and like sets for fighting and stuff like that. And then when he fights the guy who's kicking on the boat in the beginning of the movie, like the first thing he does where he's like, let's fight like real men, then he takes off his helmet and drops it. And they're like, why would you do that?
Right.
Why? That is like the number one thing you shouldn't do right now.
Just take off your protective gear.
Take off your protective gear.
So let's talk about gear. So that was a good segue. The biggest difference, so I like gear, I like movie props, I like superhero outfits. The biggest difference, and the one thing that I do not even know the real answer to from the comics, is Tobey Maguire's web shooters are built into his body. And they are under his skin. Mm-hmm. Whereas in The Amazing Spider-Man and in Homecoming, they are machines, basically, that either he or Tony Stark build and strap to his wrists. Do you know which way it is in the comics? Because I don't.
I think with all the different iterations of Spider-Man, I almost feel like it's like one or the other. Like I don't know if there's a set like, oh, this is how this was until this thing happened.
I would think that in the comics, it was more like Tobey Maguire, where it's built in. Because if you really are crossing genes, cross species, then it would make sense that you would make the web, and that it would not just be some super strong, Stark Industries equipment that you're using.
Tactile steel that you can shoot out.
Or, something cable was the name of the product in The Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, but I think that it's just one or the other in the majority of Spider-Man stories. I'm sure, like, through all the different iterations of Spider-Man and stuff, there's probably one that went on for a very long time, and then they had, like, a new iteration of Spider-Man that people really took a hold to, and that probably had, like, whatever the one that it's been for so long was. This one wasn't, and people were like, ooh, well, that's neat. I like that they did that. So now the movies are kind of doing that too. Yeah,
and it gave them something else to play off of too. Well, it actually did this in multiple movies, because in Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, where it's under his skin, he gets a case of the yips, where he can't shoot.
Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, in Spider-Man 2, where he's shooting blanks, right? And it's because he can't get his head right. Just like, if you're playing baseball and you can't hit the ball, you get the yips, and then it just compounds because it becomes a mental thing. Whereas in The Amazing Spider-Man, I believe, if not in Homecoming, they get electrocuted and blown up. So
Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, totally.
With Electro.
So they play off of that in both movies, but it just makes more sense to me if it's a mental thing and not a hardware thing. Mm-hmm. But I liked all the Spider-Man suits are awesome. I know you probably know more about the suits right now because you have just finished the video game.
Oh, and it is amazing.
Now, tell me if I'm correct about this, because I have not played the game. The many different suit variations you can actually collect in this video game, right?
Yeah, you collect them by you collect backpacks, and you stop crime from happening. Basically, like, stuff that Spider-Man would do. You do research in a lab and do, like, lab projects and stuff, and you earn tokens, and then for all the tokens you get, you can purchase the new suits. And I really liked in this game, the suits were dynamic. So it wasn't just like you walking around as Iron Spider from Infinity War. You'd go into a cutscene and be like, they only programmed it with that one cutscene. Whatever suit you're wearing when that cutscene happens is what the cutscene happens in. And they also updated it dynamically by how much suits you played. Throughout the game, you keep tuning into a podcast that J. Jonah Jameson does now, and it's basically him just, like, yelling about Spider-Man, but you, like, listen to it as you're swinging around New York with, like, nothing else to do. Like, you're on your way to a mission. The game will tune you into that podcast. And so I was Spider-Punk for a while, and he dresses like a punk. He's got, like, the jean jacket vest with no sleeves, and he's got, like, a mohawk and stuff. And I did a mission dressed as Spider-Punk. And then, like, the next time I was swinging around, I changed my suit, was swinging around. J. Jonah Jameson came on, and he's like, somebody says Spider-Man's dressed like some kind of punk from the 80s running around fixing water towers. And I was like, that is pretty sweet. That, like, the game not only calls it out in the cutscenes, but, like, calls it out. Like, they know you've changed your suit, so now the game registers that you've changed your suit.
Yeah, GTA, the Grand Theft Auto franchise, has been playing around with that type of stuff forever, because they obviously have radio stations in all the cars that you can get into. And if you just, hijacked a bank, it would be breaking news, to play with that a little bit. If you just got beat up, and the next cutscene, you'd have a black eye, So it's really cool to see that video games are getting to the point where they can do that as just every day. This is how we make video games now.
Yeah, and that game, that game is awesome. There's so much cool, just like Spider-Man stuff you can do. Just like swinging around New York City is amazing. The first time I played that game, I swung to the Avengers Tower in New York. They have all kinds of Easter eggs and stuff. Like, you can visit the Sanctum Sanctorum. You can visit the Wakandan Embassy. You can visit the Rand Corporation. You can visit Alias Investigations, Jessica Jones's place. Like, you can go all over. They have all of that in New York City as you're playing the game that you can just go to and see. And so they have Avengers Tower there. So I pre-ordered the game, so I got 3 different suits just right out of the gate. I didn't have to do anything. They just gave me the suits. And one of the suits was Iron Spider from Infinity War.
Right.
So I put that suit on. First time I played the game, put the suit on. Just went to Avengers Tower. Didn't do anything there. Just, like, stood in front of it and was like, oh, this is sweet.
Yep. That's why I love open world games. They're definitely my favorite genre. But I thought it was really cool that they incorporated all the different suits and you can play around with it.
Awesome.
I mean, obviously at this point, my favorite Spider-Man suit is the Tony Stark suits because it's Tony Stark and you can do all the cool stuff and you click the button and it shrinks down to your perfect size. And I loved it had to have been Homecoming where he was locked to learning modules and they were like, oh, you haven't completed training module number 2, so you can't do this yet. And he sort of like learns to hijack it with his buddy and, you know, break through all those walls. I thought that was definitely an additional layer that made it really, really cool. And it was neat to see Spider-Man existing in that larger universe where he was being looked after by Stark and he was playing with Stark toys. And I mean, gosh, the whole movie starts with cleaning up the rubble of what happened in the Battle of New York. You know, and they come across the alien tech. You know, so everything from beginning to the end of the movie is subtly reminding you that you are living a small story in a big world.
Yes, and I love that they did that in that movie because up until that point, basically every villain in the MCU, more or less, was like, I'm going to take over the world. This is my world now. This is the... And I love that the Vulture... He was just wanted to get stuff for his family.
Yeah, blue collar guy that got in a tough spot, had to make tough decisions, much like the Sandman.
Yeah.
Much like Sandman.
And he was I would argue a good guy, even though he was making the wrong decisions, and that's even played out a little bit in the end credits when he sees the guy in prison who Spider-Man previously sent to prison. He's like, we heard you know who Spider-Man is, which he does, and he's still like, nah, he's like, if I knew who he was, he'd be dead.
Right.
And still, like, protects Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because he knows that ultimately Spider-Man did the right thing by stopping him. But, I mean, he's a good dude. And I love that even Tony Stark, Peter's like, this guy, he's stealing all this equipment. And Tony Stark's like, I have to stop the world from ending. He's like, I don't care that this dude's stealing equipment. This is not big enough for me to take care of.
Well, even Happy, who is an assistant basically to Tony in this movie, is too busy handling larger world issues than to actually respond to a text message.
Yeah.
You know? So it's cool how they like paint that and you're left with Peter sort of forging his own way and becoming his own man through it all.
Kind of more or less the street level hero of the movie MCU, not talking about like the Defenders or anything, who are like the street level dudes, but he's like the street level hero. Totally. Like, while they're out fighting aliens coming in, Peter's helping an old lady cross the street and like all this stuff. So I love that they did forge that path for Spider-Man in these movies. I think that's a great place for him to inhabit in the bigger MCU.
All right, so we've held off for a while, but we got to touch on this. Venom.
We just saw it, which is the reason why we wanted to do this podcast in the first place.
Yep. So give me your thoughts.
Well, we talked about it a lot, like right after we saw it. I thought it was really good. I liked Venom a lot, actually. I had some issues with the final fight scene, if only because I feel like they rushed that part of it. I could have watched Venom for another, 30 minutes if they wanted to keep fleshing characters out and stuff. I would have been good. They had me. But I really enjoyed it. I even remember getting probably about halfway in the movie, or what I think was halfway in my head, and just thinking to myself, I really like this movie. That I don't dislike it yet, so I don't know where the disliking is going to come from, but I like it so far.
Yeah, I'm with you. I heard going into this movie that it was a letdown and that old boy Tom Hardy
academic decathlon,
yes, Tom Hardy, I basically heard the consensus was the movie was faulty, but Tom Hardy made it worth it because he did an excellent job.
Right.
And I can see how people would have that opinion, but for me personally, it kept me entertained. There were definitely some issues with it, like you said, the end scene where it was almost kind of like a cop-out ending where everything just sort of blew up all of a sudden, and you don't know if they lived, if he died. You know, I didn't necessarily like that part. I did think they rushed some things. I can't discredit the movie for not doing this, but something that I personally wanted to see more of was the Venom backstory. Because we know that it comes from outer space and it's a symbiote and it hops into a host and takes over the host and, can have the effects of Spider-Man 3, or it could have these effects. But I wanted to hear more about that. I wanted to know where it came from, why it was developed. Is it just a creature that lives in space? Was it a space science, experiment? Who is Riot, other than the team leader of Venom?
Yeah.
How do all of these people play together? I expected it to be more of a Venom story and not a Brock story. And I think it ended up being a lot more of a Brock story.
Yeah, what I remember even thinking too, like, oh wow, Venom hasn't popped up a lot yet, and then it was like the final fight, and I was like, oh, okay, which is kind of like why I thought they rushed it, because up until that point, Venom, I mean, he had some cool scenes. I love the way they did Venom talking in Eddie's head. I liked that a lot because it lended itself very easily to a lot of humor in the movie.
Yes,
where Eddie didn't want to do stuff, and Venom's just like calling him out for it.
Make no mistake, the Venom voice is absolutely the comic relief of that movie.
Yes, 100%. And but up into the final fight, we've seen Venom take his form once or twice before. Really, the only other huge fight they get into is when he's like taking down the guys at the building, where it's like all smoky and stuff, and he's like jumping around taking down the guys at the building. That's basically the only other huge fight.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool how it hopped into the girl.
Yeah,
for a little while.
Where she became She-Venom.
She-Venom. I thought that was pretty neat. I'll totally give them that. I think a lot of people had issues with that. I'm okay with it. But I enjoyed it. It totally kept me entertained. If you like the Amazing Spider-Man movies and those didn't bug you, Venom is going to be no problem.
I would say I liked this movie better than I liked at least Amazing Spider-Man 2.
2, yeah. It would be I'd have to go back and rewatch the.
It would have to be hard, 1. Yeah. Amazing Spider-Man 1. I'd have to look.
Yeah.
But Venom, it just had like this fun feel to it. It just felt like something different that we hadn't seen before, because it felt like this was Suicide Squad, but just like one person. Like, we aren't supposed to be rooting for this guy, but it's a bad guy versus a worse guy.
And it felt too. It did not feel like it belonged in the MCU, which is not a knock on it. It just had its own flair, and it had its own feeling, and it had its own colors. And I think that it honestly lines up more as a sequel to the Amazing Spider-Man or the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans than it ever would for the MCU. And they don't even play with the MCU. I mean, they don't mention it at all. They don't reference aliens. They don't reference a battle in New York. It's as if this alien that is taking a hold of him is the first time he's ever heard of such a thing.
Right.
So they are in no way, shape, or form trying to really tie it in by what we've seen so far. And I appreciated that. At the same time, obviously it was my dream for like the very end for new Spider-Man to come out or do something or be there and them being like, hey, Disney,
Yeah.
But that never happened, and I'm okay with it. And it was definitely more of like a darker movie. I think the number one thing they could have done to maybe amp it up a little bit, and this is something I heard from a friend of mine, and I thought it was an excellent sort of statement, is that they almost needed to lean heavier on the dark, gritty side of things.
I would have loved it if they did that.
Yeah, that Venom almost needs to sort of hold a darker edge, and that like almost this Venom deserved to be like a rated R movie.
Yeah.
And if they were to have done that, then I don't think they would have gotten any complaints.
Yeah, and this a lot of this conversation we had like directly after the movie. Speaking to the point of the MCU, Zach, super nerd, who's like watching out for all this little stuff, there's just a line Eddie says, and it's a joke line, where somebody's telling him about the symbiotes when he's going into the Life Foundation for the first time. And he's like, ooh, like an alien, like a space alien? Ooh. And I was like, well, that just immediately set it outside the MCU. If they were in the MCU, he would know about aliens.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it's one little joke line, but I'm like, that completely negates you being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Right there. Unless this is set in like 2011, and I mean, they're not like flashing dates or anything. The tech that's in this movie is pretty much in, we could have had in 2011. So as long as it took place before the Battle of New York, we should be good. But yeah, speaking to like the more of the grittier stuff, I would have loved it if they did that. And I think probably they were going that direction. They were gonna make it R-rated, And then maybe Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, somebody was like, well, if it's good, it could be an MCU movie.
Right.
And so they were like, well, I guess let's make it PG-13 then. Let's play ball and see what we can do.
That was kind of my hopes, is that it would come out and it would do so well that they were like, in the MCU now.
Well,
You're ours.
It's not doing well critically, but audiences, box office-wise, it's doing really well.
Right.
Actually. And I wouldn't mind if Marvel was like, okay, it's an MCU movie. Just because I loved Tom Hardy, Eddie Brock. I thought he did really good. I love the symbiotes are already there on Earth. The whole story set up with that. We don't got to waste time in Spider-Man by seeing that kind of stuff. And I loved the little tease of Carnage at the end with Woody Harrelson. I loved that.
Who I thought was going to be a major player in the movie.
Yeah. Because they market it that way now.
Right.
That's just how marketing works.
Yeah,
they're in
true.
2 seconds, but they got a big name. Guess what? They're starring in it.
I also like how they fixed, which I'm not sure if I ever even thought it was an issue with Tobey Maguire Spider-Man until after I saw Venom. But Venom in Spider-Man 3 is almost more associated with the suit. Like it grabs hold and it takes control of the suit. And Peter Parker can take it off, put it on, take it off, put it on. Now, when it really locks in and he wears it for a long time, he has a hard time getting it off. He goes to the bell tower, makes noise, rips it off, etc., etc. I don't like that as much now, having seen Venom, as the way Venom was played in the most recent movie. I liked it better in the new movie, and I liked that he had his own voice and he played his own character, and there was a bit of a duality behind it. It was almost like you were getting 2 actors for the price of 1, and I really enjoyed how they did that versus having Venom basically wear a Venom Spider-Man outfit. Mm-hmm. Because he does. Even when you see it crawl off of Peter Parker in Spider-Man 3 and get onto Brock, it still has the spider webs on it. It still has the spider emblem on it. It's as if it consumed the suit, and it's just bringing the suit along with it. And I never knew that didn't make sense until after I saw Venom, and then I was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. I like it the new way better.
Yeah. And I mean, really, even if they want to go more traditional that way, of even in like the Venoms in the comics, he looks more like the new movie, but he does have like the spider symbol, like all that stuff. So I think even they could make a joke out of it, kind of like how they did in Age of Ultron, where Vision's looking around and he sees Thor's cape and he's like, huh, and then he just grows a cape. I think they could do something like that if Venom and Spider-Man ever interact, and Venom's like, I like his suit, we should look like that. And then so he puts on like the spider emblem and like updates himself.
Vision grows a cape? Hang on, pause.
Yeah, what? This is the problem you have?
Which movie is this?
Age of Ultron.
Venom grows a cape?
No, Vision.
Yeah, Vision. I'm totally gonna. I must have missed that.
Yeah, whenever Vision is like born in Age of Ultron, he's like looking around and stuff, and then he like forms clothes on himself, and then he keeps looking around and he sees Thor's cape, and he goes like, huh, and then he just grows a cape, and that's why Vision has a cape, because Thor had a cape and he thought it looked cool.
Blowing my mind right now.
They make it a point in the movie, like you see it in the movie happen.
That apparently just went right over my head. I have no idea. I must have been taking a swig of my icy or eating some popcorn or something.
Yeah, that happens for sure. So one of the questions I came into, and it's kind of related to Venom right now, what villain have we not seen yet in the Spider-Man universe that's in the Spider-Man repertoire, and cameos aren't included? I'll even go so far as to say other movies aren't included. You could tell me you want to see a good updated Doc Ock. What's the villain you want to see the new Spider-Man face?
Well, the biggest Spider-Man villain I think that we haven't seen, was it Doctor Doom? Isn't he a Spider-Man villain?
Maybe in parts. He's mostly Fantastic Four.
Okay. You're right. You're totally right.
He's mostly a Fantastic Four villain.
I don't know, man. I'm drawing a blank. My Marvel villains Rolodex in my head isn't doing me any favors right now. Who do you think?
There's 2 people I want to see. One is not currently set up in the MCU, and one is. So the first one I want to see that's not set up is Rhino, because I love when they match superheroes to supervillains that don't necessarily like Joker is the anti-Batman. Right. He's all about anarchy, this and that, like not justice, not truth, but like they still can physically go at each other, and it's a pretty well-matched fight or whatever. So I love the Batman-Riddler relationship, because Riddler's like, I could care less if I fight Batman. I want to fight the world's greatest detective. And so that's why he sets up all like the tricks and riddles and right. stuff like that. So I like when Spider-Man fights Rhino, because Spider-Man is a very strong person. Captain America threw his shield at Bucky Barnes' arm. Bucky caught it like nothing. Then Bucky threw a punch at Spider-Man in Civil War. He caught it and was like twisting it around. It was like, whoa, you got a metal arm. Like nothing. So Spider-Man is insanely strong in these movies. But I like that he's smart, strong. I just want to see him fight a big brute, like a giant dude who can thunder through anything. Yeah. And that comes with the Rhino.
Because we saw Rhino for a grand total of 20 seconds.
Right.
At the very, very end of one of the Amazing Spider-Man.
Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
He was in the beginning and the end, and he had a robotic rhino suit, and he's like, I am the Rhino, was Paul Giamatti.
Yeah. And I didn't even care because Gwen just died, and I'm still crying. Like, no, not really. But
I couldn't even see the Rhino through the tears.
Gosh, that's such a good question. When it comes to the cinematic universes, I really just kind of take the villains as they come at me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's really kind of more my take on it. I wish that I knew more about the inner workings of all of the comics and who's come in and who's gone and who crosses timelines and crosses stories, but I really just don't know that many details. But I can say that in the Marvel Universe, they do go out of their way a little bit to show who is more powerful over each other. Like when Iron Man and Thor go at it, like you see sort of the equal powers, you know, that they are almost equals and they're having a hard time figuring out who won that fight, you know? So it's like they do a really good job of showing who can absolutely kick somebody's butt and then who is overpowered by anyone else. And I almost feel like, with the exception of maybe the Scarlet Witch, everyone in the MCU right now, all of the heroes are pretty evenly matched. Like, they've made it a point to say Hulk is as powerful as Thor, who is as powerful as Iron Man, who can,
who's as powerful as Captain America.
Who's as powerful as Captain America.
Who's as powerful as Bucky Barnes, who's as like, they all kind of fought each other at this point.
Other than Hawkeye, who has no superpowers other than hitting his mark really to speak of, he would probably be considered the weakest with Black Widow, unfortunately, because they're two of my favorite. Scarlet Witch probably is the most powerful out of all of them.
Scarlet Witch is the most powerful. In the comics, Scarlet Witch, somebody kills a mutant, kills Quicksilver, her brother, and so she just whispers, no more mutants. Every mutant in the universe is wiped off the face of the planet. So she's the most powerful, for sure, by far.
I want to see Scarlet Witch versus Phoenix in Phoenix form. Or Dark Phoenix, or whatever they're calling her.
Well, now that Marvel's getting a hold of X-Men, we might get to see that.
I know. That would be cool. Bringing the mutants,
that would be pretty sweet.
Around would be very, very cool.
And I think the only real reason right now we don't see Scarlet Witch just out there ripping people up is because she's still getting to know her powers. In Civil War, she blew up half a side of a building on accident. So she's true. Still like figuring everything out. Also, to do with her powers, I really like how they've kept the magic the same. I don't know if you've noticed this, the same hand stuff. Like how Doctor Strange does his magic, he makes the same symbols, but they're very fluid and straight and forward. Her magic comes from a place where she didn't learn it. It was imposed upon her. So she follows this same like hand structure, but it's dirty and like her fingers are twisted and it's not straight. Watch out for it because it's really cool the way they do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I haven't noticed that. I'll definitely have to keep an eye on it. Mm-hmm. I did notice how a lot of her magic used the same animation style. It was just different colors. Even like the actual CGI of the big red, flourishes coming out from her hands and all of that look very similar to what you would see from Doctor Strange, but hers are not quite as tame. They're not, perfect geometric circles.
Right,
and
she doesn't know them yet. And I think that's something that could be interesting to kind of show the formation of her learning her powers is like her hands get straighter. She starts to do like the Doctor Strange type stuff.
Right.
I think that would be a cool way to do that. We're totally off base. This is Spider-Man. We're talking about Scarlet Witch's powers.
Yeah, so Spider-Man's powers.
They're really cool. He gets bit by a spider.
Radioactive spider. I do, when Spider-Man was getting the yips, take it back to that. That sort of bugged me in a weird way because it almost played as if he was losing his powers, which totally just should not be possible. Like, I understand if you get something in your head, then maybe you can't produce web on demand. But to lose eyesight, to lose strength, to have to wear your glasses again, I think that was one of the main issues I had with not Spider-Man 3, because there's totally more main issues with that, but Spider-Man 2. What I really didn't like was when he got the yips and he started going backwards, because first time I saw that, I'm thinking, are we about to watch Spider-Man lose his powers? Because it was sort of marketed that way, that he was going to, degrade a little bit. So that was just something I didn't like worrying about. And also, throughout the entire Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 with Tobey Maguire, I loved MJ, but I hated MJ at the same time. She was like, their relationship was the most frustrating thing ever. Because as soon as he turned her away, and she knew he didn't want to turn her away, but instead of digging deeper, she just meets up with some other guy and gets another boyfriend and gets engaged and starts kissing Harry again. And it's like, dang, Mary Jane, slow down. Like, let the boy take a deep breath and get his head right.
Come on.
I know, for real. Whereas with Gwen in the Amazing Spider-Mans, there's a lot of that ish, but at the same time, it feels much more authentic of a relationship between those two.
Well, yeah, and it's even like, she's like, I know you're Spider-Man. You made a promise to my dad that you'd stay away from me. I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about you and I care about me.
Right.
And so that's like how their relationship keeps going. And then they break up in Amazing Spider-Man 2 and then they come back together because it's still that like, I don't care. I love you. I want to be together. Whereas like Mary Jane and Peter Parker loved each other. And Peter's like, well, I'm Spider-Man. Peace. And she's like, well, then forget you. Yeah. She just goes makes out with James Franco.
And when James Franco tells her, or it's inferred that he tells her all of the things she has to tell Spider-Man when they're on the bridge, and she's like, I never liked you, I hate you, dear Alf Alpha, or or whatever.
Dear Alf Alpha.
Yeah. So,
I hate your guts.
They never go back, and Mary Jane never comes around and says, oh, this was a ploy by Harry who put me up to it, and this is why I said these things and disappeared and whatnot.
Right.
It's like they never go back over and repair any of that damage. They just let it build up and build up and build up. And when I was a kid watching this, when I was 12, 14 years old, I loved Mary Jane, thought she was awesome, had a crush on her just like every other kid did. But going back and rewatching those movies, it rubs me the wrong way. Their relationship really rubbed me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. That I never really had a problem with it. I probably would if I would watch them again now. But it's the same as like seeing Romeo and Juliet at this point. You're like, yeah, Peter and Mary Jane, they're supposed to be together.
Right.
Because that's what we've been set up to believe.
They'll eventually come back to one another, kind of thing.
It's Romeo and Juliet. It's lovers separated by circumstance who still find their way back to each other. Yeah. It's that whole thing, just in superhero form.
Exactly. Well, what have we not covered? We've covered Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3. We've covered The Amazing Spider-Mans 1 and 2. We've covered Venom. We've covered Homecoming. We didn't go back any further than that. Heck, we even hit on a video game.
Yeah, we hit on a video game. So I think we've covered a lot.
I think we've covered a lot as well. I would say that Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 with Tobey Maguire are definitely still my favorites, only because it's a fully fleshed out story. When new Spider-Man gets his due and gets another movie or two under his belt, and especially when they bring him into the Avengers, then again, that could very easily turn into my favorite. But I'm holding out for now, just because we have yet to see how it develops. In The Amazing Spider-Man, if you like superhero movies, they're not bad. They're really not bad. They're underrated. I have some issues. Everybody has issues, but they'll keep you entertained. Yeah. And don't be afraid of Venom.
Yeah, Venom's good. I'm diving headfirst. Tom Holland, who's the current Spider-Man, 100% my favorite Spider-Man to ever be on film. I've broken it down like Tobey Maguire is a great Peter Parker, but he's not the best Spider-Man. He doesn't quip. He doesn't but he's a fantastic Peter Parker. Andrew Garfield wasn't very good at being Peter Parker. He's this super handsome 6-pack ripped teen who's being picked on by everyone. Oh gosh, I hate when that happens. Bad Peter Parker. But he was a good Spider-Man. He quipped, you felt his emotion and all that stuff. I think so far Tom Holland is the best Peter Parker Spider-Man combination we've gotten. Because he's smart, he quips, he does a fantastic Peter. I can understand why people are like kind of picking on him or like just kind of leave him alone, don't really talk to him and stuff. So I'm diving headfirst into Tom Holland being the best Peter Parker. I was about to just say I'm diving headfirst into Tom Holland, but that sounds weird, so I just kept going with it.
Yeah.
But thank you everybody for tuning in. Next week we're going back to another horror movie. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to keep it coming for the next 2 weeks of October. New horror movie podcast for you guys. We just had to get our thoughts on Venom out. We had to let you guys know what we thought about that. And so we thought, why not just do an entire Spider-Man podcast? So thank you guys for tuning in. Really excited for next week. Really excited to see what Venom might have coming up, what Spider-Man has coming up. So remember to like, comment, subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at ScruffyMovies and
Crockalicious.
Every time. You see, every time. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.